there's one other thing that people really want to know about during tax season, and that is if maybe I'm expecting a tax refund and I'm filing with my spouse. It's a joint refund, but I don't get that refund every year because that refund is offset to pay my spouse's debt that I don't owe. And that's not really fair. And there is law that says that you basically have a separate legal interest in a joint tax refund. But the IRS does not know that you have a separate legal interest and maybe that you don't owe the debt that might be offset by the Department of Treasury. So you have to file something either with your tax return or you can file it independently. And that's called an injured spouse claim. And we have a great brochure that we can send to you that explains an injured spouse claim. But basically with the injured spouse claim, to qualify, 3 things must happen. One is that you must have contributed to the income on that tax return. You either had withholdings or you were self-employed, but you must have contributed to the income. The second thing is you must have contributed to the refund in some way. It might be because you had federal income taxes withheld from your pay, or it could be you qualify for the refund because if you file separately from your spouse, you would have claimed the children, and the children qualified you for the earned income tax credit or the refundable child tax credit. And the third thing is you can't owe it, only your spouse can owe it. And a lot of people say, well, how does that really work in the real world? Well, for example, your spouse may owe child support and have an arrearage, and so the refund will be offset to pay that child support, but you don't owe that child support debt. It could be your spouse owes the Department of Education, maybe defaulted on a student loan, but you don't owe that debt. Maybe it's even your spouse before you got married owed the IRS, or maybe while you were married there were years you filed separately and your spouse owed on those separate tax returns. So the real theme here is that you don't owe that debt, and in some part of your earnings and your payments or your eligibility for tax credits qualified you for part of that refund. And that's called an injured spouse claim. And there's a form 8379 that you can complete to get that injured spouse claim. It's usually worked by the IRS in about 8 to 12 weeks. And like I said earlier, you can file it with your return, and that's what you should do if you know about it ahead of time. But if you were surprised and didn't get your refund and didn't know that your spouse had an outstanding debt and it got offset, you could still file that injured spouse claim independently. You want to contact our low-income taxpayer clinic for help with those claims. That's 866-481-3669. And we have attorneys who, if you qualify, may be able to help you with that injured spouse claim. Now, there's something that's very similar to what I just talked about called that was the injured spouse claim, but this thing is called innocent spouse relief, and we have a brochure that talks about innocent spouse relief. And innocent spouse relief is a situation where you actually do owe the debt. And maybe it's not fair that you owe it, but you file a joint return, and because you file a joint return as a married person, the IRS says that you both owe the debt, even if it's the other spouse's income that generated the debt. Or maybe you got divorced and your family law attorney put in your divorce papers and the judge approved that the other spouse will be responsible for that debt while you guys are married. That's not going to be binding on the IRS, but there is something called innocent spouse relief that you can apply for. And if the IRS grants that innocent spouse relief, you will no longer be responsible for that joint tax debt. And if the IRS has kept any of your refunds, or you've made separate payments on that account and you're granted relief, you might be able to get some or all of those payments back as a refund. So innocent spouse relief is filed by using an IRS form 8857. It is something that's kind of difficult to do, and it is something that the IRS tends to challenge a lot. So